The Black Dahlia, 1947. Part I. The Girl, the City, and a Nameless Sea in Los Angeles, 1947. The city was emerging from World War II, overflowing with optimism, neon lights, and promises of a brighter future. Hollywood sold dreams to the world, and for thousands of young people, especially women, it represented the possibility of becoming someone new. But behind the glow of marquees and movie posters was another Los Angeles, lonely, anonymous, and at times, unforgiving. Elizabeth Short was one of those dreamers. 1. Elizabeth Short. A life that never became a legend. Elizabeth Short was born in 1924 in Massachusetts. Her childhood bore little resemblance to the glamour later attached to her name. Her family fractured early, illness followed her for years, and financial instability was a constant. From a young age, Elizabeth carried the feeling of being on the margins, always searching for a place where she truly belonged. People who met her later described Elizabeth as polite, soft-spoken, and carefully put together. She favored dark clothing and neat makeup, but never in an ostentatious way. Despite decades of sensational headlines, there is no credible evidence that she lived recklessly or engaged in criminal behavior. Much of what the public came to believe about her was shaped not by facts, but by tabloid storytelling. Hollywood, for Elizabeth, was not about fame. It was about recognition. She had no major roles, no contracts, no powerful patrons. She drifted between temporary rooms, modest hotels, and the homes of acquaintances, sustained largely by goodwill and fragile hope. She was not invisible, but she was vulnerable. 2. The morning that changed American crime history. On the morning of January 15, 1947, in a vacant lot in Lima Park, a local resident noticed what initially appeared to be a discarded mannequin. It was not. The positioning of the body made one thing unmistakably clear. This was not an attempt at concealment. It was a display. Police quickly identified the victim as Elizabeth Short. Evidence at the scene indicated that the crime had occurred elsewhere and that the body had been transported afterward. There were no signs of a spontaneous act or an unplanned struggle. More importantly, the condition of the remains suggested time, privacy, and composure. This was not a crime born of panic. 3. When the media took control of the narrative within hours, Los Angeles newspapers turned the case into front-page news. The nickname the Black Dahlia was born, not from law enforcement, but from newsroom editors drawing inspiration from popular culture and Elizabeth's appearance. Elizabeth Short ceased to be a person. She became a story. Journalists dissected her personal life, her movements, her relationships, her ambitions. Gradually, a distorted image emerged, mysterious, provocative, and burdened with implication. This transformation had two devastating consequences. The victim's dignity was compromised. The investigation became flooded with misinformation. 4. Messages without a confession. Days later, several major newspapers received anonymous packages containing Elizabeth Short's personal belongings. There were no explicit threats, no direct confession, only a signal. The sender wanted to be seen. This behavior revealed that the perpetrator was not satisfied with committing the act alone. Public reaction mattered. Attention was part of the motive. The crime extended beyond violence. It became a performance. 5. A logical psychological profile based on available evidence. Modern analysts outlined several probable traits: high emotional control, no indication of intoxication or impulsive behavior, some familiarity with human anatomy or medical environments, narcissistic tendencies, and a desire to manipulate public perception. In this framework, Elizabeth Short was more than a victim. She was a symbol. 6. Los Angeles. A perfect environment for disappearance. Post-war Los Angeles was an open city. Massive population growth, loose oversight, and fragmented record-keeping. People arrived daily, reinvented themselves, and vanished without leaving much trace. This worked in the killer's favor. The Black Dahlia case is not only the story of a murder. It is the story of a city unprepared to confront its own darkness. Part 1 ends here, where truth begins to dissolve under the glare of the spotlight. The Black Dahlia, 1947, Part 2. Suspects, Reason Theories, and an unanswered question. More than 70 years later, the Black Dahlia case remains open. Not because of a lack of suspects, but because of an excess of theories. 1. Why the killer was never found. The uncomfortable truth is that the investigation was compromised from the start. The crime scene was not adequately secured. Media access preceded forensic discipline. Hundreds of false confessions drained investigative resources. Once these failures occurred, the opportunity for resolution diminished rapidly. 2. George Hodel, the most cited suspect. George Hodel, a physician living in Los Angeles at the time, has long been linked to the case. Decades later, his son, a former homicide detective, publicly accused him of the crime. The reasoning includes medical knowledge consistent with the evidence, documented police surveillance during the original investigation, a private life marked by disturbing allegations. However, from a legal standpoint, the case against Hodel remains circumstantial. No definitive physical evidence has ever emerged. 3. The theory of social protection. Another logical avenue suggests the killer belonged to a respected or educated social class. Supporting points include access to a private space where the crime could occur undisturbed, confidence that suspicion would not easily fall upon them, an understanding of how media narratives operate. In post-war America, individuals fitting this profile were often assumed to be trustworthy. That assumption may have served as the perfect disguise. 4. Was Elizabeth Short a personal target? A critical question remains. Was this crime personal? There is no clear evidence of a prior conflict between Elizabeth and her killer. This leads to a chilling possibility: she was selected not for who she was, but for her accessibility. The crime reflected obsession rather than personal grievance. 5. A crime of power, not desire. Many contemporary experts argue this was not a sexually motivated crime, but one driven by control. Every element, from the preparation to the communication with the press, points toward domination and authority. This aligns with offenders who possess an inflated sense of self, harbor deep resentment toward society, seek recognition, even through infamy. 6. The most unsettling conclusion. When sensationalism is stripped away, logic points to a disturbing conclusion: the killer was likely ordinary. Not a drifter, not a known criminal, but someone who went to work each day, maintained a stable outward life, and trusted that the system would never look too closely. 7. Why the Black Dahlia still haunts us. This case endures not solely because of its brutality, but because it exposes an unsettling truth: some crimes are never solved. Elizabeth Short became a symbol not because of how she died, but because of how her story was told. 8. Closing thoughts. Who killed Elizabeth Short? We may never know. But the Black Dahlia case reminds us that when a society shines too brightly on dreams, the shadows behind them grow deeper. And sometimes, the most frightening element is not an unknown killer, but the silence left behind by history. Modern forensic re-evaluation. WHY the Black Dahlia case remains unsolved. More than 70 years after the murder of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia case continues to resist resolution. Modern forensic science does not provide a final answer, but it does explain, with greater clarity than ever before, why the truth may never be fully known. The primary obstacle is timing. In 1947, forensic investigation lacked the tools that define modern criminal analysis. DNA testing did not exist. Blood evidence could not be individualized. Crime scene preservation was inconsistent, and the long-term value of evidence was poorly understood. As a result, much of what today's science relies upon was either lost, contaminated, or never collected. By modern standards, the crime scene was compromised almost immediately. Civilians, journalists, and investigators moved freely through the area where Elizabeth Short's body was discovered. Any trace evidence, fibers, biological material, or latent impressions was effectively destroyed within hours. From a forensic perspective, the case was damaged before it truly began. Modern investigators also emphasize a distinction that was not fully developed in 1947: the difference between a primary crime scene and a body disposal site. Nearly all available indicators suggest that Elizabeth Short was not killed where she was found. There was no evidence of a struggle consistent with a spontaneous attack. Instead, the scene suggested deliberate placement. This implies that the crime occurred in a controlled environment, likely indoors, where the offender had time, privacy, and the ability to clean the area afterward. Such conditions point away from a random offender and towards someone with access to a stable, private space and confidence that it would not be discovered. Behavioral forensics further sharpens this understanding. Modern analysis distinguishes between modus operandi, the practical steps taken to commit a crime, and signature, which reflects the offender's psychological needs. In this case, that distinction is clear. The functional aspects of the crime suggest planning and control. Other elements, however, served no practical purpose. The presentation of the body and the deliberate engagement with the media indicate symbolic intent rather than necessity. These actions were not required to avoid detection. They were meant to communicate dominance and control. This was not impulsive violence. It was deliberate expression. Another long-debated element is the offender's apparent familiarity with human anatomy. Modern forensic experts caution against assuming formal medical training based solely on precision. Accuracy does not automatically equal professional education. What it does suggest is comfort with the human body and with actions that would typically provoke hesitation or emotional resistance. This level of familiarity points to repeated exposure rather than a single learned skill. Possible backgrounds include medical or dental training, military medical service, mortuary work, or other occupations involving routine contact with bodies. The key factor is desensitization. Equally revealing is the offender's interaction with the media. Modern forensic psychology views this behavior as highly significant. The decision to communicate through newspapers rather than directly with law enforcement suggests that the offender was not seeking negotiation or confession, but recognition. The timing and tone of the correspondence imply confidence, patience, and emotional detachment. This aligns with personality traits often associated with narcissism or psychopathy, not necessarily mental instability, but a calculated lack of empathy and a desire for control. Victimology provides further insight. Elizabeth Short exhibited several factors associated with increased vulnerability: a transient lifestyle, limited stable relationships, financial insecurity, and an aspirational identity in a competitive urban environment. These factors do not imply blame. They indicate accessibility. From a modern perspective, Elizabeth Short was a low-risk target in terms of immediate detection. Her disappearance was unlikely to trigger urgent alarm. This suggests an offender who understood social structures and selected a victim accordingly. Geographic profiling adds another layer. The location where Elizabeth Short's body was discovered was public enough to ensure discovery, yet isolated enough to avoid witnesses. This balance suggests familiarity with the area and deliberate planning rather than chance. Modern geographic analysis would likely place the offender's base of activity within a limited radius, consistent with the post-war urban landscape of Los Angeles, areas where residential neighborhoods and undeveloped land existed side by side. Despite public fascination, it is unlikely that DNA evidence will ever solve the case. Any biological material that may still exist has likely been degraded, contaminated, or compromised by poor documentation. Even if usable DNA were recovered, identifying a match after decades would require genealogical connections that may no longer be traceable. Science cannot recover what was never preserved. When modern forensic logic is applied to historical suspects, many once prominent names lose credibility. What remains is not a definitive identity, but a consistent behavioral profile. The offender was likely male, socially integrated, emotionally detached, and capable of blending into ordinary life. This profile does not identify a person. It identifies a type. Perhaps the most unsettling conclusion of modern analysis is that the offender may never have been caught because he did not stand out. The absence of confirmed repeat offenses does not necessarily indicate remorse. It suggests control and restraint. Modern forensic science does not close the Black Dahlia case. Instead, it explains why closure may be impossible. Elizabeth Short's legacy lies not in mystery, but in instruction. Her case reshaped investigative standards and highlighted the consequences of lost evidence and unchecked speculation. What remains is a sobering realization. The Black Dahlia killer was likely not a monster hiding in the shadows, but someone ordinary, someone no one thought to fear. And that may be why the case still refuses to rest.